Need some Wilds of Eldraine cards? Well, you can snag them from our sponsor, Card Kingdom, over at cardkingdom.com/mtggoldfish. Hello everyone, and welcome to a super special video. So Wilds of Eldraine is about to release, which means it's time to talk about the cards from the set that actually could have an impact on various constructed formats. And today, we are talking Eternal. So in the past, we've done like Pioneer and Historic and Modern, a whole bunch of separate videos. This time we are putting them all together, and we are talking about our top 10 Eternal cards from Wilds of Eldraine. And joining me to do this, of course, is Crim. Good morning, Crim, or I guess technically evening, but hello, Crim, how are you?
Well, it's so late, it's almost morning. So
yeah, for me, it's morning. For you, it's night. Yeah, technically at this point. So the way we're going to do this, a little bit different than in the past. You can see our individual top 10 lists over on the website. I'll link the article in the description to this video, but we're going to go back and forth. My fifth favorite card, Crim's fifth favorite card, until we get all the way through the top 10 cards from the set. But before we get into that, we got some honorable mentions to talk about. So we're going to start off with my 3 honorable mentions, cards that just missed out on my top 5 cards. And these are cards that I'm mostly hyped for Pioneer, actually, all 3 of these. So number 1, Regal Bunnycorn. I've seen people call Regal Bunnycorn the Pioneer Tarmogoyf as a 2-drop that can be really, really big. That might be a bit of a stretch because it does need permanence on the battlefield. So after a Wrath, it's very much not going to be Tarmogoyf. But we've seen some very aggressive Boros decks, like those Boros token whack style decks take off. They just flood the board with creatures super, super quickly. You can have like 8 creatures on the battlefield on turn 3 or something. In a Boros Convoke Shell, I feel like Regal Bunnycorn might actually legitimately be the Pioneer Tarmogoyf that just comes down, you can bushwhack to haste it in and just smashes your opponent for a ton. So I'm not to the point where I think this is like a format staple. It's going to be in every deck, but I do think there are decks that can use it. Heartflame Duelist, I think this card could be a good humans card. You can splash it in your humans deck, get a little reach in your deck, get a little removal in your deck, and have a on tribe human 3/1 body. And then Kellen the Fae-Blooded, this one's a little speculative, but we see Pioneer Hammer Time be kind of a fringe deck in the format, and that deck plays Open the Armory, and the adventure side of Kellen is literally Open the Armory, except you also can play the creature side. So if you're playing Pioneer Hammer Time, I feel like this is just like strictly better Open the Armory, right? Like, why would you not play Kellen at that point if you're already playing Open the Armory? So that's a fringe scenario that hasn't really taken off as a top tier deck, but it is a nice upgrade that you can tutor up your hammer and have a body later in the game. So those are my 3 honorable mentions. Crim, let's move on to your honorable mentions. What do you got that just missed out on your top 5 list for older formats?
All right, so like you remember Celestial Colonnade, all the old creature lands and stuff like that, right? So the problem with those creature lands nowadays is it feels like they're pretty poorly costed, right? And with where Pioneer is and yada, 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 I do actually think that the current batch of creature lands are aggressively costed enough to where they could see play in Pioneer, in Historic, in these sets. So that's going to be something I'm excited to keep an eye on. On top of that, Feral Encounter. Mono Green is already a popular deck. I feel like Mono Green got like 50 things this set. And Mono Green just got a card that could potentially be removal. And on top of that, it's like card advantage. So
the wording on that card blows my mind with how clunky it is. Like the card plays really simply, but it has this whole paragraph of very confusing text to get to like, I'm a fight spell that can also draw you a creature from your top 5.
Exactly. That's the TLDR version of it. And obviously I think green is going to appreciate that, right? Yeah. So I like Pioneer and like Historic got a lot of cards. Wherever mono green is popular, this whole set did a lot. Because you also have Sleight of... Okay, this is not a green card, but then you have Sleight of Hand. Now, this card, it got reprinted. I don't know if any of y'all know that. But yeah, this is... I could totally see this replacing Opt. Right? Like Opt already gets played. It won't be better than Consider, but it will replace Opt. This is just strictly better, right? I mean, maybe not the sorcery speed, but yeah. And then you have Rankle's Prank. Waste Not in Historic, in Pioneer. This is a deck that I've played. I've seen a lot of people play it.
I do like Waste Not.
This has to be a very, very sweet and perfect card in a Waste Not deck, right? Like, each player ditches 2, each player loses 4, or each player sacks 2. You could choose one or more of these modes. This is just screaming for Waste Not, right?
Yeah, it does seem that's a card that seemed very hard to use, but I feel like Waste Not is like the perfect shell for it. If there was ever a shell that can take advantage of this like symmetrical make you sack, make you discard, that's going to be the perfect home for something like Rankle Sprang. So yeah, I do like it in that shell. I will say I'm not quite as high on the creature lands as you. Like, yes, these are the best versions of the dual land creature lands we've seen. I worry, though, maybe in Pioneer. I think in Modern, for sure, the formats are just too fast for tap creature lands, even if they're, like, competitively costed like these ones. Pioneer, though, maybe there's a chance in Historic and Pioneer that you can play these because, like you said, they are much cheaper to activate, right? And they also have, like, some extra abilities. They just seem better than past versions of dual creature lands.
Yeah, in Modern, no. Modern, you will die. If you try to play one of these. But I think Pioneer, whatever, and Historic and Explorer, whatever, all of those are formats I could see these thriving in.
Well, let's move on to our top 5s, top 10s proper. And we kick things off, Crim, with your number 5. We have a little rat noble here in Lord Skitter. Why don't you tell us about Lord Skitter?
Okay, so Lord Skitter, definitely speculative, but like, Graveyard Trespasser, a popular card, right? Obviously, the ward is a huge part in what makes that card so good, but this kind of is a 3-drop. It's a 3/3 when it enters the battlefield, right, under your control. Whenever another rat enters the battlefield under your control, exile up to 1 target card from an opponent's graveyard, right? At the beginning of combat on your turn, create a 1/1 black rat creature token with this creature can't block. So this actually gives you a clock. It's like it's an army in a can. It can go off on its own. Yes, it loses the ward. Yes, your opponent could remove it before you go to combat, so you don't exile anything. But if you go to combat, you get the 1/1. I could see you sideboarding this. Like black mid-range decks, why wouldn't you want this? This is a sweet win condition on its own, right?
Yeah, it is. It is an army in a can. Graveyard Hate is always good in older formats. And the rat token, even though it can't block, like there are a lot of synergies. We see like sack decks are pretty popular in formats like Pioneer. Historic, you see them a little bit, not as much as in Pioneer, I don't think. So you get sacrifice synergies. Bargain is another mechanic that can really take advantage of these like pretty bad tokens that can't block. But if you're bargaining them into something better, what do you care? So I think this card has a lot more synergy. My main concern, honestly, is just like it's legendary, so maybe it's more like a 2-of style card rather than a 4-of like Graveyard Trespasser, but I really like that comparison, and I think this card does a lot of little sneaky things, especially if you're a deck that can somehow take advantage of that rat token without having to like try to attack with it or whatever, like get synergy out of sacrificing it or so on and so forth.
If only Black had ways to take advantage of sacrificing things and draining and things, and who knows, whatever. What other cards there could be. Also, I don't think this is going to Modern, by the way. I'm under no delusions here. This is going into Pioneer, Explorer, and maybe Historic.
Well, let's move on to number 5 on my list. And we got another card that I don't think has a chance in Modern because Modern is very good at punishing X1s at the moment. And I think this is also sadly true of Historic. And that's Elusive Otter. But this is a card I'm actually kind of hyped about for Pioneer in specific. I think you have to be a non-Orcish Bowmaster format for this card to really be exciting to me. So we're talking Pioneer / Explorer on Magic Arena. So it's a 1-mana 1/1 prowess that creatures with power less than it can't block. So it doesn't get chump blocked essentially. And then it also has a spell mode, which is green and X sorcery, distribute X +1/+1 counters among any number of target creatures you control. So there's not that many 1-drop prowess creatures in Pioneer. You got Soulscar Mage, you got Monastery Swiftspear. There might be one other that doesn't see any play. I'm trying to think if there is even a third one, but 1/1 prowess creatures are actually pretty rare. And this is a pretty good one because it actually has some evasion built in. Not a super strong evasion, but not getting chump blocked is a big deal. It's in a little bit of an awkward color with its adventure mode being in green, so you'd have to kind of get into Teamer to take advantage of that. But again, once you get to older formats, splashing a third color is not the end of the world, especially if this is an adventure that you can just run out on turn 1. And the thing I love about this card is in the decks that would want it, which are prowess decks, this is a threat that you don't mind playing that is also a spell to trigger your prowess creatures. And I feel like that's just an inherently powerful effect. Like, when I've tried to build prowess decks before, sometimes you run into trouble where you're like, okay, I want all these creatures, but I still need all these spells to trigger my creatures or my deck doesn't work. There's this balancing act between getting enough spells, getting enough creatures. Elusive Otter just kind of gets around that by being both all at once, which I think is a really powerful effect. So the color concern is a thing. But I think this is of a power level. This could be very playable in some sort of like, is it prowess deck splashing a little green so you can cast Grove's Bounty in a format like Pioneer? Again, if you're in a Bowmaster format, I don't think you can play this card, sadly. But outside of Bowmaster formats, I actually really like this for prowess decks. But what do you think, Crim?
I don't think this is a one drop. I think, like, unless you absolutely need it to be, but you feel real bad if it is. It is oftentimes going to be like the top of your curve. Right, this card I feel like is going to be the top of the curve. I'm not sure if a blue-red prowess deck wants to add green. Right, it's not like you can just go and you like crack your polluted delta and go get like a breeding pool or something. Right,
it's
like
true.
This is a real cost, and so I don't know. I mean, I'm not sold on it yet, but if there is something that allows you to go blue and green prowess, I do like this in the deck.
Well, let's keep moving on to number 4 on your list, Crim. We got a card that, when I saw this, I started thinking against the odds, infinite combo shenanigans, but it's on your list for historic, maybe Pioneer. We're talking Blossoming Tortoise. What are we doing with the Magic's Best Turtle?
Okay, this is not a meme, I swear. Okay, it's okay. First off, it's a decent rate card, right? Like I think green devotion is the obvious thing here. Having played a lot of, Explorer and, seeing historic and wherever Nykthoses are played, right?
Yeah.
This card is usually going to be there because, okay, so for those that don't know, 2 green, when it enters the battlefield or attacks, mill 3 cards, then return a land card from your graveyard to the battlefield tapped. Activated abilities of lands you control cost 1 less to activate. Land creatures get +1/+1. Whatever. Last part's irrelevant. But so
Lair
now
the Hydra, Crim. That makes your Lair the Hydra bigger. Don't underestimate the Lair of the Hydra.
Look, that you're actually saving a lot of mana on the Hydra land. It costs 1 less to activate, and it gets pumped. But like legitimately, this card seems great in any kind of like the mono green devotion deck, right? Your Nykthos now costs 1. Oh no, it came into play tapped. If only there were a 3 mana Kiora that could untap something for you. Like, you know what I mean? Like, this just seems like a great shoe in there. It helps you get to the Nykthos. Like, you will eventually get there. And then if you're worried about losing anything else, well, you have Cavalier. So I kind of like this in that deck. I mean, of the cards that are in this set, I think this is another piece that, not that, the Nykthos decks are hurting. And like, or anything, but like, this is something they could look at.
My only question, and I think you're right, this does seem like a kind of card that does exactly what a mono green devotion deck would want. It helps find Nykthos, it makes more mana with Nykthos, it powers up Lair of the Hydra as a fringe thing, but my only question is, what do you cut from those decks? That's my one challenge. If I look through a green devotion deck, I'm like, what am I taking out? I can't cut the Mana Dorks. I need Old Growth Trolls, mana symbols, like Pelucranos maybe is kind of like the flex slot. Maybe the Cityscape Leveler goes to the sideboard and you just find it with Karn if you need it. So I think if you can find room for this does do everything that it wants. It might not be a 4 of though, just because I'm not sure there's enough flex slots left in the mono green devotion deck at this point to actually fit 4 of a card in the deck, even if it's a good card for the deck.
Yeah, that's going to be the hardest part for this. It's just, what do you cut?
Well, let's keep moving on. Next up on my list, we have some modern action here. We've been talking a lot about Pioneer and Explorer, but number 4 on my list, we have Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and this one is almost exclusively for modern. So it's a 2-mana legendary artifact. Let you spend mana for activating abilities however you want to, doesn't really matter. The big deal is creatures you control with +1/+1 counters on them have all the activated abilities of all creature cards exiled with it, and you can tap it to exile a card from a graveyard, and if it's a creature exiled this way, you put a +1/+1 counter on target creature you control. So Agatha's Soul Cauldron is essentially like a synergy or combo piece, depending on what deck you'd play it in. I think the most legitimate top tier home is probably Hardened Scales decks, where this can exile a Ravager from your graveyard. All of your creatures are already going to have +1/+1 counters, because that's kind of the whole gimmick of a modular +1/+1 counter Hardened Scale deck. All of your creatures turn into Arcbound Ravagers, which is kind of wild with the Ozolith and with Hardened Scales. So I think that's the most likely home. Plus, as a deck that's built around sacrificing artifacts, a legendary artifact doesn't really matter because you can always sack additional copies to power up your Ravagers if you need to. But it also has potential to be a combo piece in like Yawgmoth style decks. You can use Yawgmoth's activated ability. There's some really weird combos with Grist of all things in a Yawgmoth style deck, where if you exile a Grist, your creatures with +1/+1 counters have Grist's ability, so you can use the loyalty abilities with the creatures you control, which is kind of funny. So I think that's
they can't. They can only use but they would have to plus like a ton of times, right? Because it still requires them to use the loyalty counters to lose it.
Yeah, so you'd have to plus first before you can start minusing with Chris. But you start with 0 loyalty. Essentially, you're a creature with loyalty abilities and 0 loyalty starting off when you first do it. But you can plus to make an insect. Yeah, you're kind of death rate shamaning. So I think those are the homes for this deck. Plus, there's some like more against the odds style combos. I don't think you'll see like super competitive play, but I actually think this card could have a pretty big impact on Modern. It's only 2 mana, so in those archetypes that can take advantage of it, I think it could be pretty good.
Anyway, do you think, Hardened Scales decks still exist in Modern?
They do. They do. They're like tier 2.5-ish, but they do exist.
I feel like you're being pretty generous with tier 2.5.
I mean, they show up if you look at like the metagame page or whatever. Hardened Scales is on there. It's not like super high up near the top, but it is a deck that people like 5-0 with and actually do things with. Yawgmoth is a legit Modern deck. That's like not tier 1 anymore, but it's like legit tier 2. What do you think about like arena formats, Crim? I know like Yawgmoth has become one of the best historic decks recently. Does this have any implications in historic, you think?
I'm trying to think, like, what could they do that is, like, because, like, they're still missing some pieces from the obvious, like, the Modern version, right?
Yes, there are some missing pieces. Grist is probably the biggest one. There's no Grist.
Yeah.
Probably
I don't
not.
think this does.
I would say Modern exclusive for me. Maybe there's some weird combo that I haven't thought of yet that could make it work in another format, but I think it's pretty much only for the Modern versions of the deck.
Yeah, like if we're talking about like historic or anything, there's already the Kethis combo deck.
Yeah,
that's just better, right? Like they're not going to need this, and they're just going to go off faster.
Well, let's keep moving on. Next up on your list, Crim, what do we got?
All right, so Questing Druid. Now, this, we talked about it in Standard, right? This made it onto your list in Standard, completely not even on my list when it comes to Standard. But when it comes to Pioneer, I think this card has a home. Because the problem is in Standard, there's no Gruul.
Yeah.
But in Pioneer, there's the boat deck. It is totally an option for Gruul decks in Pioneer.
I mean,
that's
draw
pretty
2
much
for
what
2.
I see it as.
Yeah, draw 2 for 2 is pretty good. Like, it's very flexible, and then you get the body. Honestly, I had this and Elusive Otter were like kind of combined for me because I want to build a deck with them together. Like, if that kind of like prowessy deck splashing into green actually became a thing, I think that those 2 cards synergize really well together. You have the 1-drop Otter that puts counters on things and has prowess. This is a spell that triggers prowess on turn 2 and draws cards. And then this kind of turns into not a prowess creature, but a Miracle Grow style creature that as you're casting your red spells and your blue spells, which would be the core of the prowess deck, this is just growing and growing and growing permanently with +1/+1 counters. Again, that's maybe a little speculative because that's like a new deck, but
help with those decks.
Yes, that is a spell that actually would work very well in those decks. So yeah, I like this card. I like this card quite a bit as well. I think this is one of the most powerful adventure cards for older formats for sure. Well, let's move on. Number 3 on my list, we have a card that looks like a meme and kind of is a meme, but I actually think is also very strong in Syr Ginger the Meal Ender. So Syr Ginger, this is the The gingerbread cookie from the original Throne of Eldraine trailer.
Right.
2-mana, 3/1, trample hexproof haste. As long as your opponent controls a planeswalker, when another artifact you control is put in the graveyard from the battlefield, put a +1/+1 counter on it and scry 1. Then you pay 2, sack it, gain life equal to its power because it's also a food. So this is a card I think has a couple of potential homes. So the big thing to note about Syr Ginger is the artifact going to the graveyard, putting a +1/+1 counter on it. We were just talking about like Hardened Scales, Arcbound Ravager style decks. This seems like a very easy inclusion there. As you're sacrificing your random stuff to put counters on your Ravager, you're also getting counters on Syr Ginger. You're also scrying through your deck to find whatever you need, which is a powerful effect. And then the Planeswalker mode, I think in Modern in specific, is actually pretty relevant. Like Red and 6 is pretty heavily played. We see Teferi be pretty heavily played. This is a card that can come down and either just smash your opponent for a bunch of damage and try to close out the game if your opponent has a Planeswalker, or it can maybe just snipe that Planeswalker and it's not going to die to the Ren and 6 at least, even though it has 1 toughness. And yes, I just gave this spiel about like how X1s are pretty bad in Modern because of Bowmasters, but in the decks that would want this, all you need is a single sackable artifact on the battlefield to grow its power outside of Bowmasters range, and that seems pretty realistic to me in a deck that's playing Arcbound Ravager or artifact tokens that you can sacrifice. So this might be more of a sideboard card. It's legendary, so it might be more of like a one of in the decks that would want it. But I actually think this very meme-ish card is of a power level that can actually see play in Modern. But what do you think, Crim?
I think it's cute. I like it. I don't know. I mean, like, it's funny. I have no idea if it's actually good. Like the problem is, can artifacts come back? Right? Like that's my question here. Can they actually come back from like the brinks of like tier 4.5?
It's not that bad. It's not, I don't know about 4.5, maybe 3.5, but
sure, on its way trending to 4. Do you think there's enough here to pull those archetypes back? That's just my thing.
There's also like Thopter Sword decks. We see decks with Urza Saga. We see decks with literal Urza, like Affinities kind of like on the fringes, but Affinities still shows up. I feel like there's enough artifact homes that this could show up in, even if it's like a sideboard Planeswalker sniper style card, that I think there's enough homes for it to work. The fact that its growing ability works with tokens, I think is really, really important. That also means like we see Asmore food decks be really good at like sacrificing artifacts. They sack them to Asmore to like snipe stuff, and that's a deck that's gotten a lot better since we've gotten some new pieces added to the deck recently with the Lord of the Rings set with Samwise and so forth. So I feel like there's just so many decks that have these random artifacts that they're sacking that at least one of them's got to be able to make Syr Ginger work and be like a real card.
I mean, yeah, maybe we'll see, because I just have a lack of faith in that archetype in Modern.
Well, let's keep moving on to something Crim does have faith in Pioneer or Historic, maybe, which is number 2 on your list, Crim. What do we got? All
right, so I love this card in Standard, and I have to imagine it's going to make waves in Pioneer and Historic. It's Werefox Bodyguard. So I think this card is just absolutely huge. Like in the tempo play, it's 1 white flash. When it enters the battlefield, exile up to 1 other target non-fox creature until it's gone. And you can pay 1 and a white and sack it and gain 2. Gain 2. And yeah, I don't know. I mean, it can protect your own creature. It can be removal. It's versatile. It's got flash. I love that. I love the versatility of this card. And in a format where Brutal Cathar does get played, mono white gets played, like Brave the Elements, yada yada yada. This could be played in that deck, and at instant speed. I do really like that.
It's definitely amazing how far we've come since Banisher Priest. I think Banisher Priest was like one of the, maybe it was Fiend Hunter that was actually the original, but Banisher Priest was just like 3 mana 2/2, do this thing, but you could only exile your opponent's stuff, and all, like it was like this, but so limited, no flash or anything. So this is like definitely the power creep version. I also think this is at least Pioneer playable. Like, I don't know if it makes it back to Modern. It could. It's possible in like an Ether Vial, like Taxes style deck. Maybe this is good enough to like be removal that can save your important stacks piece against, you know, whatever, Storm or whatever. You can save your Thalia or something. That would be the home in Modern. But I think this is definitely of a power level that at a minimum is going to see play in those older formats. And it's also a Knight. So, I mean, Circle Loyalty, Crim. Circle Loyalty is time to shine.
Oh,
we finally got there.
This is all that card needed, and now it's tier 1.
This is what Circle of Loyalty's been waiting for.
I'm just saying, this is going to replace Brutal Cathar. I think it's going to replace Brutal Cathar.
Outside of, I think I'm going to give the same answers in Standard. I think there's still decks that just are going to care about Brutal Cathar's creature type. So if you're a deck that cares about that, then you might stick with Brutal Cathar. But if creature type doesn't matter to you and it's not relevant to your deck, I think Werefox Bodyguard is just a better version, I would say. But let's move on. Number 2 on my list, I have probably the boringest card on my list, but also the one card that I will 100% guarantee you is going to be a 4-of in a deck that 5-0s a Modern League, like the day after Wilds of Eldraine comes out, which is not dead after all. So not dead after all, we have a bunch of these effects. 1 mana, essentially reanimates a creature that died this turn. You target a creature, when it would die, it comes back into play. The twist here is, rather than putting a +1/+1 counter on it, it gets a Wicked Roll attached to it, which is an enchantment that gives +1/+1. And when the ore goes to the graveyard, each opponent loses a life. So this is a piece for scam decks. Rakdos Scam is the number 1 deck in Modern right now. And if you've seen these decks, their whole game plan is turn 1, exile a card to play Grief with Evoke, and then before the Evoke trigger resolves, use a card like this to target your Grief, so Grief comes back into play. The end result is you get double Thoughtseize on turn 1, and you have like a 4/3 on the battlefield with Menace to start beating down. One of the best things going in Modern. This is the best version of the Reanimate Grief effect. Right now, people use Fiend Death, and there's another one that does the same exact thing, Undying Malice maybe. That's just 1 mana, reanimate it, put a +1/+1 counter on it. The fact that this doesn't give a +1/+1 counter is actually really, really huge. It has the same effect as far as stats. It's still giving +1/+1, but it's an aura. And what this does is it lets you play Undying Evil, is one of your secondary reanimation effects, which is actually another upgrade. Undying Evil just gives the creature Undying until end of turn, which means if it doesn't have a +1/+1 counter, it comes back into play. The big deal is it comes into play untapped, which is unique. You couldn't play Undying Evil before because the other thing that, this is such a long-winded explanation for a 1 mana common that is like a very slight upgrade, but you couldn't play Undying Evil before because your other effects put a +1/+1 counter on it, so Undying wouldn't work. So all this to say, in this long rambling speech, it's a 4 in the scam deck, and you're probably going to lose to Grief on turn 1 because it's pretty busted to get double Thoughtseized and your opponent have a 4/3. So what do you think, Crim?
I mean, yeah, like why not? Right? Like this yeah, it has a home. It's already right there. It's writing. The writings are on the wall. It's going into the scam deck, right? Rakdos Evoke.
It's like a 2% improvement or something. Like it's a very slight improvement over the ones that were before. But if you play competitive Modern, you want to play the most optimal version. I think this is just the most optimal version now. But let's move on
100%.
to a card that we both agreed. Number 1. And honestly, I would say that it's not even really close. Like all the other cards we've talked about are like, I don't know, maybe topping out at A tier, maybe like high Bs. And then you have Beseech the Mirror, which is a card that I'm like, oh my God, I think this might just be legitimately broken and problematic. Beseech the Mirror, 4 mana, if you, black mana, 3 of it. If you bargain it, you get to search your library for a card with mana value 4 or less and play it for free. If you don't bargain it, it's horrible. It's just a bad demonic or diabolic tutor. But if you bargain it, this is play the most important card from your deck for 4 mana. This is just absurd, right, Crim? Isn't this card just like straight up busted?
Yeah, I mean, with how easy it is to just get bargaining material as we go back in formats, like there's just no way. And then it puts it into play, right?
Into play.
It actually
it's even better. You get to cast it, which is even better than putting it into play a lot of the time. What's the really good card in Modern right now would be the One Ring. Same with Historic. This is like, my One Ring gets some counters. Oh no, the burden, it's getting too much for me. What if I sack my One Ring and just get another One Ring and get protection again for another turn and start the process over? What if I sack my Orcish Bowmaster token and get a Sheoldred? What if you go back to Legacy? There's a bunch of like turn 1 win lines in Storm decks, because Storm decks are already playing a bunch of like like Lion's Eye Diamonds, Lotus Petals, these 0 mana artifacts. So there's a bunch of like Dark Ritual, sack my Lotus Petal, get my thing that lets me loot my graveyard, my Yogg-Will style effect. I loot my graveyard, I do it again, cast a Tendrils, win on turn 1 because of Beseech the Mirror. The card's ridiculous. This card is just, do you think this card could be too good, Crim? Are you at all worried that this card is actually like too good, or is it just very good?
I think it's very strong, but I don't know. Like at the end of the day, I guess it's like copies 5, 6, 7, and 8, right? Of whatever your best cards are.
It's more Shieldreds.
Is it that bad? I mean, it is also triple black. Like
That's
I don't
true.
know. I mean, it's powerful. It's obviously absurdly powerful, right? But like, it's no different than any of the other powerful things that are going on in the format. So
is it
I guess
possible?
it just doesn't bother me.
Yeah. I think for me, I get more scared of it once I get to like Legacy and Vintage. Like the further back I go, the more I'm like, okay, this might be a problem. I think like Historic, Pioneer, Modern, I think the card's very good. But I don't think it's going to be like problematically good in those formats. If it's actually going to be too good, I think it would be in Legacy or Vintage, where the turn 1 lines are just, because you don't have the fast mana in formats like Modern or Pioneer. So yes, this is adding consistency. Yes, it's finding your best card. Yes, it can cast the 0 mana cards if you want to, the like restore balances, living ends style stuff if you want to go that direction. So there are really good things to do with it. They're looping One Rings, Shieldreds, but I don't think you can do anything too bad with it in those formats, just because you're playing it mostly fairly. You're playing it, on turn 3, on turn 4. In the older formats, like Legacy or Vintage, where you have Dark Rituals and other fast mana effects, that's where I worry this might actually just be like too consistent at really fast wins. But though, I guess once you get back to those formats, you also have Force of Wills and like the very good, strong, free interaction to stop it. So maybe it'll even itself out. But regardless, I mean, this card's going to see a lot of play, right? Like pretty much across formats. And even, I think it might even show up in Standard some. In Standard, I think you can build around it and make it work as well if you really want to.
I mean, obviously Standard, it could have a home, right? I don't know if Standard needs it, but the older formats are going to want this. So yeah, this is an auto staple now, pretty much in black.
Anyway, I think that brings us to the end of our top 10 Eternal cards from Wilds of Eldraine. So now you've seen our list, and again, you can check out our full list over on the article on the website. It'll be linked in the description. But now that you've seen our picks, let us know your picks. What cards from Wilds of Eldraine are you excited to play in non-standard 60 card formats? What are you hyped for in Explore, and Historic, and Modern, and Legacy, and Pioneer? Give us your picks in the comments. Crim, thanks for hanging out and doing it. It's always super fun.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for watching, everyone. So that brings us to the end of our video today. Have an amazing day. And this is the crew signing out.